how do we mitigate against these things, right? So I talked about a few major things. We talked about, for example, the anti-restart. We talked about braking. We talked about e-stop. So let's focus on those just for a sec. Lockout, tagout. I think there are going to be better resources than me for this, and so I'm not going to dive into this. I assume you guys have experts on this in-house. Obviously, an important part. I would also check out that minor servicing exception. There are lots of articles on it. We're not going to dig into it here. Braking. So we talked about coasting, right? Tools coast. Now, there are a number of ways you can mitigate against this. Some equipment, like a bandsaw or a lathe, will have a mechanical brake built in, right? Like this bandsaw, right? You have a pedal that's actually electrically interlocked, so it turns off the machine when you press it. And you can hold that down and it will stop the machine. Definitely better than nothing. A few comments on it though is if you think about the hierarchy of controls, that is a manual action at the end of an operation. And so that's an administrative control actually, because that's your requirement as a company would be, hey everybody, don't forget to put your foot on the brake when you're done using the bandsaw or before you take a measurement on the lathe. Because you know what the most common brake for a lathe is? Someone's hand on the chuck. And so when we're thinking about these, definitely better than nothing, but we want to go into that kind of automated space. Also, I've heard some interesting things in my many days at customer sites. One is, I've heard this now twice, is that operators say they go, no, we never use that foot brake. And I say, why? And they say, because that's for emergencies and we don't want to wear it out. That was news to me, right? But I've heard it twice now, so it's something that people believe. The second is, oh, the little brake pad wore out 30 years ago and we never replaced it, right? That's especially true for lathes, that last so long nowadays. Some people get creative and they DIY solutions. I would not recommend that in a professional space. And you can, of course, make a custom control cabinet that would do whatever you want, including braking. But when you're talking about a $80 grinder or a $1,000 bandsaw, no one's going to drop $3,000 or $4,000 on custom controls. They just don't do it. And then there's things like our product, which does braking that we'll get into in a little bit as well. And there's kind of the cross between friction braking and then also electronic motor braking, which we'll talk about. Secondly, restart prevention. And just to kind of clarify what this is, I'm specifically talking about if power is lost as a result of a blackout or tripping a circuit breaker or having an overload condition, right? Power disappears for some reason. And then when the power returns, whether it's because someone reset a breaker or the utility came back on, most machines will just restart because they are still, their on switch is still in the on position. And so that is how most machines kind of come from the factory, especially on the smaller side. And so NFPA, ANSI, OSHA, everybody requires that that does not happen, yet it still does all the time. And this goes by a lot of names. You might see it called safe start, low voltage dropout. These are all related. If you have heard about a magnetic switch, that's helping with this problem. And there's a number of directions you can go. All the way from this tiny little switch over here, that's about 20 bucks, that is a completely legitimate retrofit as a magnetic switch to a bandsaw or other tool. It's in fact, if you buy a bandsaw that has a magnetic switch, this is the exact one it will probably have. It's a Chinese company called Keidu. They supply basically every power tool switch that's commercially sold. And the one interesting note though, is that their magnetic and non-magnetic switches look identical. So unless you actually test the equipment or you pull it out and look at a model number, there's no way to know. There's also a few plug and play anti-restart devices that I'm going to be giving some cautions about in a moment. There is what's called a UL 508 control panel. Everybody sells these. So any safety provider you have, you can get a hold of one of these, a couple $100, no big deal. They're great. A lot of these have e-stop and the restart prevention. You can buy other inline products, and of course, our product also does restart prevention. So we'll be talking about why these are maybe not the best. These two on the bottom aren't a good plan. And then, of course, emergency stop. So emergency stop, as I mentioned, you can argue on different machinery whether it's required or not. But what I have seen lately on the small machines, like the shop tools, is there is an increase in the number of citations for both anti-restart and e-stop. And I can't explain why. My guess is that it's a little bit of the changing of the guard of OSHA inspectors. You've probably seen, as you guys encounter inspectors, a lot of them are in their 60s, now bringing on someone in their like 20s and 30s, kind of training them up. And that's happening across the industry. And so what I suspect is that someone with not a lot of experience walks into a shop and they go to what's familiar, right? They go to the small tools because they have a little more traction. They're a little more informed of what to do with those. And so these smaller tools are getting more citations. And you can, of course, do a custom control cabinet. You can actually, in some cases, do just a momentary foot switch. So OSHA has specific code clarifications where on things like a pipe threader, they say a momentary action foot switch can meet the needs of anti-restart and e-stop. Again, not every case, but is an interesting kind of exception and gets us into that like, oh, that's an easy fix. That's a low-hanging fruit that we can sometimes apply. If you want to get really fancy, you can have wireless e-stops, and that freaks me out a little bit. They're real products, they exist, apparently they work. And again, you can get into these control panels. And what I often recommend with e-stops is, depending on the actual piece of machinery, you can have more than one, and it's normally really doesn't cost much different. For example, if you're a lumber company and you're using large band saws and you're often resawing, chances are there's someone on kind of the feed side and someone on the other side. And so the person kind of maybe holding and supporting material, if you're resawing a large piece of lumber, they don't necessarily have access to turning that machine off. So if something goes wrong, they're helpless. And so that's an easy case for just put another series e-stop on the other side of the machine. Probably cost you $50, and you significantly reduce kind of the chance of a hazard getting really bad. And then again, our product also does e-stop.